Well, now here in Westminster, it's still not the government's policy to rule out a no-deal Brexit, but cabinet ministers have been lining up to warn against it. In Parliament, the Business Secretary, Greg Clark, said it should not be contemplated. And Work and Pension Secretary Amber Rudd told this morning's cabinet that it would make the country, quote, less safe. In the Commons this evening, a cross-party group of senior backbenchers opposed to a no-deal Brexit has inflicted embarrassing defeat on the government in a vote on the finance bill. And that vote, 303 to 296, it's going to limit the Treasury's tax-raising powers in the event of a no-deal. Now, that trial of strength is a sign of the running battles that the Commons will face over the next week as the Brexit debate reaches its climax. I'm joined now by our political editor, Gary Gibbon. Gary.
Well, I think you're right. That vote shows where potentially we are heading, particularly if Theresa May doesn't get her way with the vote next week. It's not an absolutely critical vote. This is not a sign that the majority that there is in that place against no deal can stop no deal. It's not at all clear that they can, given that the exit date for Britain is in legislation. But it's tangible proof of their strength and of their willingness to cooperate. And one of the things that tantalizes people as they look at the amazing machinations, I've never seen anything quite like this actually, the number of backroom meetings and furtive sort of conversations between Labour and Conservative and smaller parties as well in there that I've witnessed today is something you haven't seen for a very long time, and they are wondering what they can put together by way of a voting coalition if Theresa May's deal can be defeated. Can they get enough people together to do something else? A very different approach perhaps to Brexit, or maybe even a second referendum altogether. They are nowhere near there yet. They are still atomised, brown in motion, sort of pinging around, but those conversations are happening, and I think the fascinating thing looking at tonight is how some people will think it indicates perhaps potential in that direction. Here's how the day went here.
No more normal services, no tranquil order. That's what opponents of no deal say they're trying to stop in an unprecedented rush of cross-party cooperation in Parliament.
Actually, this just shows what an unprecedented situation Brexit really is, and really how high the stakes are, how time is so short, and how Parliament now wants to have a say.
There is more cross-party working going on in this place than ever since I was elected, which was back in 2010.
The ayes to the right, 303. The noes to the left, 296.
In the last few minutes, in a show of strength, opposition MPs combined with some Tories to defeat the government on an amendment that stops the government implementing some no-deal provisions, unless it's come back for another Commons vote. And in yet another cabinet in which there was much talk about no-deal preparations, some ministers sounded off against the very idea. The Work and Pension Secretary Amber Rudd warned cabinet history will take a dim view of a cabinet that presses ahead with no deal. As a former Home Secretary, she said, we'd be less safe as a country with no deal. Earlier, the current Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, acknowledged Britain wouldn't be able to send those landing illegally on the south coast back across the Channel under no deal. The Environment Secretary Michael Gove said those hoping for a better Brexit deal than Theresa May's were like mid-50s swingers waiting for Scarlett Johansson to turn up. But even if the cross-party anti-no dealers win Commons votes on amendments, the expert who until recently advised the Prime Minister on legislation thinks that won't necessarily stop no deal happening.
Can they actually stop no deal, this cross-party effort?
In my view, I think it is very difficult without going pretty nuclear on their position. So the finance bill today, they've made a good effort. They found a bit in the bill that refers to no deal. In reality, it's a relatively minor piece of legislation. It's about amending references, and I think it does something on VAT. So then they try and look for other vehicles. And in truth, I think what it comes down to this, if the government were at any stage to become resolute that actually we're going to have to pursue a no-deal path, and the government wish for that, the government controls so many levers, particularly this close to the deadline, that it's actually very difficult to stop.
But those in Cabinet determined to avoid no deal have talked privately about how the Prime Minister might have to shift position if her deal fails in Tuesday's vote. Backbenchers think the margin of defeat could be decisive.
On an issue of this importance in the past, a simple defeat would have been sufficient for the issue to be a serious one of concern for the future of the government. But as things stand, I suspect that the defeat will have to be quite heavy. And I suspect that for the deal to be well and truly defeated, it would have to be lost by a margin of at least 100 votes. Now, at this point in time, I think that is exactly what will happen. But I think anything under 70, the Prime Minister will probably come back for another bite at the cherry.
If Theresa May's deal fell at the first or second attempt, the cross-party cooperation seen today could emerge more forcefully.
If it goes, we're seeing today the beginning of what could assert itself. People like you reaching across the floor to put something else in the place of the Prime Minister's plan.
Well, I think it shows that Parliament won't just stand by and allow the worst to happen, that we do think that there is a responsibility to the country on this particular issue, on the risks of no deal, that there is a lot of support.
And there's a vote.
We better go.
Back into your separate lobbies.
Yes, for this one.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, now joining us now is the pro-Remain Tory MP Sarah Wollaston, who backs the second referendum. She joins us now from the lobby of the House of Commons. Sarah Wollaston, victory for you tonight, but what does it really amount to?
What it's demonstrating is that there's no majority in Parliament for a no-deal Brexit where we crash out, because Parliament simply isn't prepared to see those kinds of catastrophic consequences inflicted on people. And really what we need the government to do now is to rule out no deal. And instead of repeatedly saying that you've got to have my deal or no Brexit, the Prime Minister needs to think again and say, what are the other alternatives? And the other alternatives would be to have a people's vote, to look at maybe a Norway-style option, or indeed, if she felt minded to do so, to cancel Article 50, although I don't think that that's going to happen. I don't think that will be revoked. I think that the right way forward would be to acknowledge that there's an absolute impasse in Parliament, and to then give her deal back to the people and say, is this what you meant by Brexit? This is Brexit. This is what it looks like. This is the best deal that could have been negotiated. Would you like to go ahead with this deal, or would you rather remain on the terms that we have? But the Prime Minister absolutely should rule out a no-deal Brexit.
The problem surely actually is there's no majority for anything in the House of Commons,
Absolutely.
is there?
That's right, we have reached an impasse, and therefore instead of talking about sort of unicorn versions of undeliverable Brexit, making ridiculous promises that can't be delivered, or promises that would have disastrous consequences for individuals, communities and businesses, the Prime Minister should be putting her realistic Brexit, that is the deal that's been negotiated, taking that directly to the people, because the reality is that Parliament cannot agree, and that's just the simple truth of the situation we face.
It can't agree to a referendum either. I mean, that's one of the other things it can't agree on.
Well, I know, but the point is that this is the deal, and I think that once her deal is voted down, which I think looks very likely next week, then we're into different territory, because there are many MPs who will then be faced with that alternative. Is, do they actually go ahead and knowingly vote to make their constituents much poorer and to put them at risk of all the consequences of a cliff edge Brexit in just 80 days' time, or do they decide that at that point they could then move? As I say, the point is that they're not in that position now.
No,
but I think once we know whether the deal itself is voted down, which looks likely, then we're in different territory. But what Parliament is saying today is that
Sarah
we won't
Wollaston,
have no deal.
With respect,
Yes.
we live in a representative democracy.
Yes.
We should have a general election. Why do you want to go for a referendum when
that is...
our system depends on electing MPs to represent the voters' wishes? Why not go to the country?
Well, I have no doubt that Mr Corbyn, if he does what he said he was going to do, will call a vote of no confidence. But the point is that general elections aren't based just on single issues. General elections are based on very many more issues. And the point is that if we're ever going to come together as a country, my view is that we need to actually be realistic about what Brexit looks like. This is the Brexit deal, warts and all, and actually ask people, is that what you meant by Brexit, or would you rather stay on the deal that we already have? That's a very simple question, and it has to be put to the people because Parliament's reached an impasse, in my view.
Sarah Wollaston, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We're joined now by Ian Duncan-Smith. Ian Duncan-Smith, truth to tell, you have not got a no deal going through Parliament, have you?
Well, actually, no deal has already gone through Parliament. That's the point. The bill that was passed, the vote that was passed after the referendum and the Article 50 letter all had an end date to it, and the bill that we passed to leave is very clear. We leave. The arrangements to how we leave are the matter between the government at the time and the EU, and the agreement they've got at the moment clearly doesn't look like it's got the majority, but we'll see what the government comes back with and changes. But the Parliament's already expressed its view, so
if that's
I don't
the case, why on earth did you vote tonight? What on earth was the point? I mean,
well, this was all about a finance bill, and the finance bill is the power to the government to make all arrangements it needs. All the financial arrangements pretty much are already in the existing bill for departure. So this was a little bit of the finance bill that said, just in case there are any unforeseen little bits and pieces, then we may need to make some legislation on that. And the amendment was to say not unless you come back to the House on the Brexit stuff. So it has next to no effect on the government at all.
This was a message from our elected representatives to the Prime Minister: no deal is not on.
I agree with you. I think this was more tokenistic than anything to do with reality about having any effect on government finance. It has none at all. But it was clearly a group of people trying to send a message that says they don't agree with it.
A majority, Mr. Duncan Smith.
Okay, that's fine. It's a majority, but it's a majority of parliamentarians who have already voted for Article 50 to leave on the 29th of March, who voted for the bill, passed the bill that gives us the powers to depart, and actually also voted when we came back from the referendum to implement the referendum. 80% of the party, of the people that voted for parties that said they would respect the referendum and we would be leaving on March the 29th, come what may.
Be honest, do you think that 80% of the country actually voted to be 7% poorer once we leave Europe?
Well, I don't believe that is going to be the case at all. And in actual fact, most of those predictions that were done at the time, if you remember, after we left, after we voted to leave, everybody said we'd lose 1 million jobs, the economy would crash by up to 7%. None of that has actually happened at all. And the reality for us is that we make our own future. The British companies, British public, will actually get on and do what is necessary to make sure that we continue to trade, and to trade better, actually, and to trade with other new markets. So I think it's quite an exciting future. I don't take the view that people voted for any other reason but to take back control of our laws and our powers and our money and to do something with it. And that's the whole point.
Ian Duncan Smith, amid that excitement, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, John.
Now, Transport Secretary Chris Grayling has been accused of gross incompetence by Labour over the £14 million seaborne freight emergency ferry contract. The Shadow Transport Secretary asked an urgent Commons question, quoting Channel 4 News' revelations about the company's boss, Ben Sharp. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, has the latest now on the company that is supposed to help keep ferry routes to Europe open in the event of a no-deal customs delay.
And whether they do or do not deliver these ships, they have still been awarded a contract of £14 million. And I think it's right that members on all sides of this House have an issue with the Minister and his response today.
If there are no ferries, the whole thing falls apart. It is carry on Brexit.
It was their first chance to vent their anger over the Christmas contract awarded to unknown British firm Seaborne Freight.
A Secretary of State who signs a shipping contract with a shipping company with no ships.
So what then constitutes due diligence, and what red flags were identified?
Well, I'm a big fan of Dragon's Den, and I think it's one of those pitches that everybody would be cringing at had they actually seen it.
In the Commons today, MPs tore into the Transport Secretary Chris Grayling, the man behind the £14 million ferry contract to a firm with no ferries.
I'm simply going to say this. This government has let a contract for which we will pay no money until and unless ferries are running.
A response he repeated on at least half a dozen occasions. But it wasn't just the lack of ferries for the planned Ramsgate route. MPs were just as furious about what they saw as a lack of background checks or due diligence on Seaborne Freight and its bosses, including this man, Ben Sharp, whose previous company offered armed escort vessels to protect against piracy. For the past week, this programme has been broadcasting revelations about the boss of Seaborne Freight, which is based here in central London, who's called Ben Sharp, and his former company, Mercator International. Now, we've discovered that HMRC shut down Mercator in 2013 for failing to pay its taxes and left several creditors out of pocket to the tune of more than £1 million. And we've been told that Mercator was not operating with the correct British legal licence required for a company with ships carrying guns. Now, despite that, the government has refused to answer our questions and instead stood by Mr. Sharp and its due diligence process on Seabourn. Today, though, they were part of an urgent question from the Shadow Transport Secretary.
Ben Sharp quit his business activities in the Gulf with a trail of debt behind him. It's abundantly clear from the promissory note published by Channel 4 News that Sharp owed and still owes Mid-Gulf over £1 million and many more companies besides.
He also attacked the government's due diligence process.
Why on earth had they been allowed to restrict their investigation to the present company and not the trading history of the individuals concerned, and in particular Ben Sharp?
There are no reasons in the due diligence we have done to believe that any of those involved in this business are not fit to do business with government. And I say this again, we are not spending money unless these ferries operate.
The promissory note in question shows Mr Sharp acknowledging owing more than $1 million to Mid-Gulf Offshore. And today, emails from another client, Palm Charter, showed multiple attempts to extract payments from Mr Sharp in the months before his business, Mercator, folded.
Hi, Ben, can you please organise the transfer?
Yes, later today.
Good day, Ben. Please give me a forecast of payment.
On the road, will do.
There is no incoming in our account today. The office and crew are getting me crazy.
OK, we'll call bank now. I think I may have a solution for a third party to pay you.
Back in the Commons, one MP used parliamentary privilege to ask Chris Grayling this.
Does he not have one iota of concern about this contract being let to this shyster?
Mr Speaker, that is an inappropriate thing for any member to say, and I'm not going to respond to it.
Tonight, Ben Sharp told us that any suggestion of unpaid debt is emphatically denied. The Mercator business faltered because of a legal dispute between Mercator and a joint venture partner, which related to a complex vessel chartering contract. It's also important to state that there was no criticism of the directors of Mercator.